Assalamualaikum. My name is Nurul Nadhirah, binti Mohd Anwar. I am third year student of nutrition, and today I want to present my final year project proposal. And the title is Association between Parental Feeding Practices and Food Neophobia Among Children, a Systematic Review Protocol. Okay, this is the contents of my slides. Okay, for background, we have divided into two parts, which are introduction and also literature review. So for introduction, eating habits usually develop during childhood. So one of the feeding disorders specific for childhood is food neophobia, which known as an attitude towards food that shows persistent reluctance to eat new foods or unwillingness to accept new flavor or even fear of trying unfamiliar food. Food neophobia often leads to limited dietary variety and quality of food. Thus, this will cause deficits in certain macro and micronutrients. Okay, for parental feeding practices are usually a strategy that parents use to influence their children's eating patterns. And we have two classes of parental feeding practices, which are positive and negative. So positive parental feeding practices such as modeling healthy eating, encouraging children to try new foods and help their children in food choices and preparations can promote healthy eating pattern in the family. While negative parental feeding practices such as pressuring a child to eat has negatively correlated with food acceptance, thus this will lead to food neophobia development in later life, which are food neophobia, um, influences or factors of food neophobia, associations between parental feeding practices and food neophobia, and also parental feeding practices. So for food neophobia person, they have a thought that the food might be toxic to consume, and toxic foods usually have bitter taste, such as fruits and vegetables. Thus, this might be challenging for parents to encourage their children to eat the fruits and vegetables. And food neophobia usually peaks between age 2 and 6 years, which it is a period on which a food categorization system starts developing in the child's cognition. Okay, for influences or factors of food neophobia, first factors is the cognitive factors, which includes perception of foods, mental representation, and categorization of food items. Food perceptions is perceptual cues that lead to the visual evaluation of food to reject food, and primarily it occurs at first sight. Next, the food colors and texture also influencing food rejection. Study by Worthman and colleagues in 2015, they manipulated the color, texture, and taste of the yogurt then offered to the children. They observed that the lumpy texture has a negative influence on accepting the yogurt through how many spoons did they consume. For emotion or feeling factors, negative emotion like disgust are related to food neophobia. As an environmental factor, food intake is socially and culturally shared and is based on previous experiences, parental practices, and also social facilitation effects. Antecedents, which is the previous experiences, are through a child's gene and prenatal experiences. Okay, for parental feeding practices, parental modeling and food availability. Some studies were observed the relationship between mother's diet, parental strategies, and their daughter's behavior towards fruits and vegetables intake. The findings are mothers with a diet of more fruits and vegetables have less likely to pressure their daughters to eat, and their daughters are less likely to become a picky or fussy eating. Next, association between parental feeding practices and food neophobia. So evidence suggested that high controlling parental practices, including restriction and pressuring them to eat, may create emotionally negative consequences for children's reaction towards food and reduces the positive impacts of exposure. The rationale of this study: first, the food neophobia is associated with fewer fruits and vegetables intake. Some studies also have proven that food neophobia may increase the prevalence of malnutrition among children. However, there is no review that have been done on the association between parental feeding practices and food neophobia among children, and it also can be used as guidance for the future research. For objectives is to review systematically the existing literature that evaluated on the association of parental feeding practices and food neophobia among children. Method: this systematic review follows the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis PRISMA statement, and we will conduct computer search for English language literature from Scopus, PubMed and Cochrane related articles, as well as reference lists of existing literature between 2010 and June of 2020 to retrieve any eligible studies. So the eligibility criteria are based on PICO's element, which is P for participant or population, I for intervention, C for comparison, O for outcome measures, and S for study designs. So for types of participant that will be included in this review are those studies that have children aged below or equals to 12 years old. And the intervention is studies any correctional or experimental study that examining association between parental feeding practices and also food nophobia. For comparison, types of comparison, the study that will be included is study on the difference in parental feeding practices. And for study design, studies randomized control trials and observational studies. This is the continue from previous slide. Types of outcome measure. Study that will be included is study that report on food nophobia score among children measured by validated questionnaires, and also studies on types of parental feeding practices and also measured by validated questionnaires. Okay, for exclusion criteria, the children that have any chronic disease, developmental disability, autism spectrum disorder, or avoidant or restrictive food intake disorder will be excluded from this study. And other studies and reports, including reviews, meta-analysis, study protocols, comments, latest case reports, and guidelines also will be excluded. And studies that measure parenting styles also will be excluded because we want to measure parenting feeding styles, not parenting styles. And the last one, articles that are not written in English language and are published before 2010 also will be excluded. For information sources, we search electronic database through Medline via PubMed, Scopus, and Cochrane database via Cochrane Library. A computer search for English language literature published from 2010 to June 2020. Two authors, which is me and my supervisor, will screen titles and abstracts of the retrieved articles. Reference list of relevant studies will be further examined, searching for other potential studies to include. For search strategies, the keywords that will be used for conducting the search are children, preschool, kids, kindergarten, pediatrics, child, infant, parenting feeding styles, parenting feeding practice, parental feeding behavior, maternal feeding practice, feeding styles, feeding practice, food nophobia, food rejection, and also food nophobia score. The combination of keywords or the search terms when conducting a search by using or and and. Okay, for method of study selection, the initial screening of title and abstracts are by two authors, which is me and my supervisor, and the publication with titles and abstracts that meet the preliminary criteria will be assessed against the inclusion criteria for the review. Then, we will assess independently the eligibility criteria of full text copies of articles that cannot be excluded, and if any disagreement happen, the opinion of third author, which is Encik Ahmad Faizi, will be requested. Then, preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis prisma diagram will be used to assist in selecting the studies. Okay, for method of data collection process, the eligibility criteria will first need to be clarified before extracting the data from research papers. And the data will be extracted from the research paper and need to record the name, date, and feature for identifications. The data extraction template will be developed based on Cochrane and communication review groups for randomized control trials and observational studies. And the data that will be extracted are the study design, age of the subject, food nophobia score among children aged below or equals to 12 years old, types of parental feeding practices, and any association between parental feeding practices and food nophobia. That will be extracted from each included study on characteristics of study, characteristics of participant, type of outcome measure. So characteristics of study through publication year, primary author, country, and study design. And we will extract the data of characteristics of participants, which include sample size, age, and gender. And the data that will be extracted on type of outcome measure of food nophobia score that have been validated, and also validated questionnaires of types of parental feeding practices. Okay, assessment of study quality. Any assessment of risk of bias and any pre-specified analysis for assessing the risk of bias that are not completed will be reported and presented. Tool that will be used is Effective Public Health Practice Project, EPHPP 2007. EPHPP can assess quality of any study design, and it provides a standardized means to assess study quality and develop recommendation for study findings. So this is the components of EPHPP, which include selection bias, study design, confounders, blinding, data collection method, withdrawal and dropouts, intervention integrity, and analysis. Okay, this is appendix. Appendix 1 is the search strategies that will be used. Appendix 2 is the data collection table. Appendix 3 is the Gantt chart for 10 months. Appendix 4 is milestone for 10 months, which is more detailed in terms of date than Gantt chart. This is the references that we use.